What up, guys? So the other day I made a video giving my thoughts on the Gintama anime that I just finished and all that. I was just talking about it for a bit. It wasn't like an official review or anything. If that interests you, it's somewhere on my channel. It's the video I uploaded before this. So I decided, hey, I enjoyed doing that. I also just got caught up with Vagabond, so I'm going to talk about it. So for those who don't know much about Vagabond, let me just give you some information on it. It's kind of like a historical fiction manga that's based off a series of novels, I think it's a series at least, called Musashi, and it recounts the life of the famed swordsman Musashi Miyamoto, and him starting off as this beast-like demonic person and then slowly building up to more of like an enlightened individual, kind of. That's pretty much what it is. He's developing his sword and all that stuff. And so you'd think, it's a samurai manga, right? There's a lot of samurai stuff, and it takes place in that period of Japan, and it's got to be heavily battle oriented, right? Just all these battles. Well, I mean, it's kind of the case, right? For those who've seen it, that's who I'm directing that statement to. It's kind of the case, because there are plenty of fights, and they're really good fights, but it's not exactly the central focus of the manga. If anything, it focuses a lot more on the philosophical aspect of, being a man that lives by the sword and developing your skills and all that stuff, and the repercussions that come with that, and just generally Musashi's life. It's kind of what it is. And because it's structured that way, it kind of sets it apart from other things like it, that are very samurai-esque. So in order to make this video just a bit more sophisticated, I'm gonna segment the video a little bit into sections. So first I'll talk about the artwork, then I'll go into the story, the characters, that kind of thing, and then I'll end it off with my impressions and recommendations and all that kind of stuff. I'll probably put little timestamps in the description to help you ease your viewing experience. If you just want to see like, oh, should I read this, then just skip to that timestamp. So let's get into it. Odds are, if you've heard about Vagabond, you've heard that it's got some really fucking great art, and that's true. Like, it's damn good art, but it kind of like fluctuates, especially with some of the more recent stuff that's been going on. Sometimes the art isn't like super detailed, you see like the actual pores of the person, you're not going to get that. But then other times you get these great photorealistic pieces and panels of just like the environment with Musashi as like a centerpiece and him doing his little like sword swings and stuff. And I mean, that's not even getting into how they draw out the fights and stuff, because the fights really are wonderful. You have a lot going on in each individual panel. Sometimes you may have a bit of an issue following what happens in between each panel, where like Musashi may have just swung his sword at a dude, and then the next thing you see is the dude is like already injured and on the other side of the field, and he's stabbing another dude. Sometimes you get stuff kind of like that, but it's never been too jarring. I feel it's more often than not the next logical sequence of events that's going to occur, and then the little in between is something that is just understood and you can fill in. It's not really a big issue, I feel, but maybe people that are new to manga may have some issues with that. But to be honest with you guys, I started this manga because of hearing about the art. I had just come off of reading Berserk, which, as some of you may know, is also known for its incredibly good art, and I was just in that like craze, right? So it's like I gotta get my fix for new content with some great art, and Vagabond definitely delivered on that end. Okay, so now I'm gonna delve more into the meat and potatoes of what makes Vagabond Vagabond. As I've said like 2 other times by now, Vagabond is not a action manga. There is action in it, but it is not the central focus. The focus is on Musashi's life as a swordsman and his growth. And I know I'm stressing this point, but I think it's so important to appreciating this manga. Because someone that's like a big shonen fan that just wants people to fly around and do crazy explosions, you're not going to get that with this, but that's totally okay. It's just a different style thing, and in the end, its own identity as just this awesome little samurai slice of life almost is just perfect. As you would expect with something that revolves around the life of Musashi, Vagabond's story is very character driven, but it's not always entirely driven by Musashi. Right in the first chapter, you get introduced to Musashi, who his real name is actually Takezo at the time, and his buddy, his childhood friend Matahachi. And both of those characters are very important to the story. Musashi more so. Matahachi is just kind of, he does things every now and then. But also you get introduced to some fantastic characters. One of my personal favorites being a certain swordsman by the name of Sasaki Kojiro. And he's definitely less famous, but he's known for being the person to use the long katana, like the especially long one. I can't remember the exact name for it, but I mean, if you've played Dark Souls and you know the weapon, the washing pole, that's kind of it. That's his thing. And currently in the manga, they're hyping up this duel between Musashi and Kojiro, and it hasn't happened yet. The manga's not done. It hasn't released anything in a long ass time, which is probably one of its biggest issues. But yeah, when that fight does occur, I'm only expecting the very best, because that's the kind of stuff Vagabond does deliver. So then you may be thinking, what's really going on outside of these fights in Vagabond? And as I've said earlier, there's a lot of philosophical stuff about, being a man of the sword and living by the sword and stuff like that. But there's also just a bunch of odd things that they tend to spend a lot of time on, which you wouldn't really think a manga would spend time on. Like, very early on, they have multiple chapters, several chapters, maybe even 10 or so chapters. Honestly, that might be pushing it. But of just Musashi, at this point still called Takezo, and just hanging from a tree by a rope, kind of just there to die. And it's just his thought process during all of that. People coming up to him and talking shit, telling him like this is what you deserve, kind of stuff. And even a lot of the recent stuff, Musashi has just been chilling in this village, farming and shit. It's really interesting how they do all of this, because it's like, oh, you're just reading about someone farming. It's kind of dumb, right? It's surprisingly not. And it's hard to really describe why it's not without really giving too much away and ruining your experience of seeing it for yourself. But just take my word for it that it's not going to be what you think it is when the more quote-unquote boring stuff is going on. The last thing that I think really needs mentioning, which I touched upon just a little bit right before this, is the pacing for the story. It's kind of an interesting subject, because a lot does happen in most chapters, though you can blow through a chapter pretty fucking quick. However, there's times where even though a lot of dialogue is getting, thrown out, exchanging of words is happening, all these different thought process things are going on, characters may not move for 2 chapters. It's really odd. I think it helps with building up this like tension, but definitely to a new reader or someone that's expecting a lot of action to happen, when it's like, okay, the swords are drawn, let's go. Sometimes it's just not the case. But then there's other times with a certain event involving Musashi and a lot of swordsmen, I don't want to say anything more than that, where it's just non-stop action for like 20 chapters. It's nuts. But at the same time, like even what I said earlier with the farming stuff, sometimes they just do that for like 50 chapters. You really never know what's going to happen and how long it's going to happen for. But I feel that the length really adds to it, and they're able to expand on every aspect of what's going on. That said, I believe that reading this series as it's still coming out, which I'm going to end up doing if it ever gets off of a hiatus, would be an absolute headache, because chapters are about 20-something pages long for the most part. There's been a few that are in like the 30s and 40s, but you get that, and then you have to wait some indiscernible amount of time until you get more on that subject, and even then the characters may not progress really. It's kind of like a double-edged sword with the pacing and how they structure things, because you get every single important detail, and sometimes with like a certain person's backstory, you'll see the finishing slash happen like 3 times from different angles with different perspectives on it. But at the end of the day, it's all quality content. It's so odd, honestly, talk about this. Like, I didn't prepare much for this, so I know I'm just saying that a lot, but it's kind of odd to put it into words exactly. It really is. So, final thoughts and recommendations. Here it is. Vagabond is fucking fantastic. I cannot stress enough how fantastic it is, actually. If there was ever a manga that you wanted to show people, to tell them, like, not everything is schoolgirls and mini skirts, and it can be extremely artful and all that great shit, you have to go with Vagabond. It's one of those things where you start it out and it's like, yeah, this is pretty good, and you get into it, and you're 50 chapters in, you're like, where is the time gone? 100 chapters in, holy fuck, this is crazy. 300 chapters in, it's nuts. I delete my memory and read it all again. So for recommendations, if you're really into the samurai thing, you have to check it out. If you've actually already had done a little research on Musashi in the past, I think you'd really enjoy this. Keep in mind, it is historical fiction. It's, not everything is exactly accurate, because, first of all, it's hard to have exact historical accounts of Musashi to begin with. There's a lot of debate on what's happened in his life. If you liked Berserk as well, this is kind of in that same level of manga, where it's, the really nice art, great story, action, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, guys, let me know what you think of Vagabond. I'd love to hear what you think. If you're feeling generous, drop that like and that subscription or whatever as well. It's always greatly appreciated. Add to the Tusk herd. That'd be a good name for us, for my subscriber base, a herd, because elephants have tusks and it's a herd. Whatever. Alright, guys, see you around.